Am I live? Sorry about that. It said 0 up there. Well, obviously, I misspoke yesterday when I said I've been reading for more or less for 365 days. I've took a break in between, so. But perhaps I should have read all the way through. Then I'm sure I would have beat some Guinness Book of World Record for something now. Reading the most books read out loud on YouTube for 20-minute intervals or something. I don't know. Anyway, let's see if old Johnson has any good bon mots for today. About this time, the Reverend Mr. John Hussey, Hussey, who had been some time in trade and was then a clergyman of the Church of England, being about to undertake a journey to Aleppo and other parts of the East, which he accomplished. Dr. Johnson, who had long been in habit of an intimacy with him, honored him with the following letter. Now, that is a terribly worded sentence, but I won't get there right now. Dear, to Mr. John, I'm going to pronounce it Hussey because that's what it looks like to me, but maybe it's Hussey. Dear sir, I have sent you the grammar and have left you 2 books more, by which I hope to be remembered. Write my name in them. We may perhaps see each other no more. You part with my good wishes, nor do I despair of seeing you return. Let no opportunities of vice corrupt you. Let no bad example seduce you. Let the blindness of Mahometans confirm you in Christianity. God bless you. I am, dear sir, your affectionate, humble servant, December 29, 1778. I guess Mahometans must be what they called, Sam Johnson. Must be what they called Muslims back then. I guess. I don't know. Johnson did this year express great satisfaction at the publication of the first volume of Discourses to the Royal Academy by Sir Joshua Reynolds, whom he always considered as one of his literary school. Much praise indeed is due to those excellent discourses which are so universally admired and for which the author received from the Empress of Russia a gold snuff box, adorned with her profile in bas-relief, set in diamonds, and containing what is infinitely more valuable, a slip of paper on which are written with her Imperial Majesty's own hand the following words. Oh, here's some more French, and once again I'm remembered that I have been being bad at translating the French in comments. But I'll read it to you anyway. Pour les Chevalier Reynolds in témoignage du contentement que j'ai ressenti à la lecture de les excellents discours sur les peintures. I don't know what that means, but I can kind of suss out that it basically means this is given to Reynolds for, good job writing something, discourses. Sounds like that's pretty much what it says. Could be totally wrong. Who knows? I'll know if I ever end up doing these translations, but I always forget. It's hard. It's more tricky for me now because I have to remember to go back. Whereas before, when I was just making these videos and saving them, I could, before I uploaded them to YouTube, I would remember to do that. But not that you care. In 1779, Johnson gave the world a luminous proof that the vigor of his mind and all its faculties, whether memory, judgment, or imagination, was not in the least abated. For this year came out the first 4 volumes of his prefaces, biographical and critical, to the most eminent of the English poets, published by the Booksellers of London. The remaining volumes came out in the year, Boswell here has 1780, but a later editor has corrected him and said 1781. The poets were selected by the several booksellers who had the honorary copyright, which is still preserved among them by mutual compact, notwithstanding the decision of the House of Lords against the perpetuity of literary property. We have his own authority, in Life of Watts, that by his recommendation the poems of Blackmore, Watts, Pomfret, and Yalden were added to the collection. Of this work I shall speak more particular hereafter. On the 26th of January, I wrote to him in several topics, and mentioned that he had been so good as to permit me to have the proof sheets of his Lives of the Poets. I had written to his servant, Francis, to take care of them for me. Mr. Boswell to Dr. Johnson, Edinburgh, February 2nd, 1779. My dear sir, sad news, everybody. Garrick died. Garrick's death is a striking event. Not that we should be surprised at the death of any man who has lived 62 years. Keep in mind, Johnson is now about 70. But because there was a vivacity in our late celebrated friend which drove away the thoughts of death from any association with him, I am sure you will be tenderly affected with his departure, and I would wish to hear from you upon the subject. I was obliged to him in my days of effervescence in London, when poor Derrick was my governor, and since the time I received many civilities from him. Do you remember how pleasing it was when I received a letter from him at Inverary upon our first return to civilized living after our Hebridean journey? I shall always remember him with affection as well as admiration. On Saturday last, during the 30th of January, I drank coffee and old port and had solemn conversation with the Reverend Mr. Falconer, a non-juring bishop, a very learned and worthy man. He gave 2 toasts, which you will believe I drank with cordiality, Dr. Samuel Johnson and Flora MacDonald. I sat about 4 hours with him, and it was really as if I had been living in the last century. The Episcopal Church of Scotland, though faithful to the royal house of Stuart, has never accepted of any cage d'élire since the Revolution. It is the only true Episcopal Church in Scotland, as it has its own succession of bishops. For as to the Episcopal clergy who take the oaths to the present government, they indeed follow the rights of the Church of England, but, as Bishop Falconer observes, they are not Episcopals, for they are under no bishop, as a bishop cannot have authority beyond his diocese. This venerable gentleman did me the honor to dine with me yesterday, and he laid his hands upon the heads of my little ones. We had a good deal of curious literary conversation, particularly about Mr. Thomas Ruddiman, with whom he lived in great friendship. Any fresh instance of the uncertainty of life makes one embrace more closely a valuable friend. My dear and much respected sir, may God preserve you long in this world while I am in it. I am ever your much obliged and affectionate humble servant, James Boswell. On the 23rd of February, I wrote to him again, complaining of his silence, as I had heard he was ill, and had written to Mr. Thrale for information concerning him, and I announced my intention of soon being again in London. So Johnson had to respond to that. To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear sir, why should you take such delight to make a bustle to write to Mr. Thrale that I am negligent, and to Francis to do what is so very unnecessary? Thrale, you may be sure, care not about it, and I shall spare Francis the trouble, by ordering a set both of the Lives and Poets to dear Mrs. Boswell, in acknowledgment of her marmalade. Footnote here from Boswell. He sent a set elegantly bound in gilt, which was received as a very handsome present. Persuade her to accept them, and accept them kindly. If I thought she would receive them scornfully, I would send them to Miss Boswell, who, I hope, has yet none of her mamma's ill will to me. I would send sets of Lives, 4 volumes, to some other friends, to Lord Hailes first. His 2nd volume lies by my bedside, a book surely of great labor, and to every just thinker of great delight. Write me word to whom I shall send besides. Would it please Lord Onlock? Mrs. Thrale waits in the couch. I am, dear sir, etc., March 13, 1779, Sam Johnson. I love this running gag of Boswell kind of being needy, writing to Johnson. Johnson's like, all right, Boswell, leave me alone. You're embarrassing yourself, man. Anyway, this letter crossed me on the road to London, where I arrived on Monday, March 15th, and next morning at a late hour found Dr. Johnson sitting over his tea, attended by Mrs. Desmoulins, Mr. Levitt, and a clergyman, the Reverend William Tasker, who had come to submit some poetical pieces to his revision. It is wonderful what a number and variety of writers, some of them even unknown to him, prevailed on his good nature to look over their works and suggest corrections and improvements. My arrival interrupted for a little while the important business of this true representative of Bayes. Upon it being resumed, I found that the subject under immediate consideration was a translation, yet in manuscript, of the Carmen Seculare of Horace, which had this year been set to music and performed as a public entertainment in London for the joint benefit of Monsieur Philidor and Signor Baretti. When Johnson had done reading, the author asked him bluntly if upon the whole it was a good translation. Johnson, whose regard for truth was uncommonly strict, seemed to be puzzled for a moment what answer to make, as he certainly could not honestly commend the performance. With exquisite address, he evaded the question thus: "Sir, I do not say that it may not be made a very good translation." Here nothing whatever in favor of the performance was affirmed, and yet the writer was not shocked. A printed ode to the warlike genius of Britain came next in review. The bard was a lank, bony figure with short black hair. He was writhing himself in agitation while Johnson read, and showing his teeth in a grin of earnestness, exclaimed in broken sentences and in keen, sharp tone, "Is that poetry, sir? Is it Pindar?" Johnson answered, "Why, sir, there is here a great deal of what is called poetry." Then, turning to me, the poet cried, "My muse has not been long upon the town, and," pointing to the ode, "it trembles under the hand of the great critic." Johnson, in a tone of displeasure, asked him, "Why do you praise Anson?" I did not trouble him by asking his reason for this question. He proceeded, "Here is an error, sir. You have made genius feminine." "Palpable, sir," cried the enthusiast. "I know it, but," in a lower tone, "it was to pay a compliment to the Duchess of Devonshire, with which her grace was pleased. She is walking across Coxhearth in the military uniform, and I suppose her to be the genius of Britain." Johnson said, "Sir, you are giving a reason for it, but that will not make it right. You may have a reason why 2 and 2 should make 5, but they will still make but 4. I guess it's a translation, so that's why the language is gendered, I'm guessing. Although I was several times with him in the course of the following days, such it seems were my occupations of such my negligence, that I have preserved no memorial of his conversation till Friday, March 26, when I visited him. He said he expected to be attacked on account of his Lives of the Poets. "However," said he, "I would rather be attacked than unnoticed. For the worst thing you can do to an author is to be silent as to his works. An assault upon a town is a bad thing, but starving it is still worse. An assault may be unsuccessful. You may have more men killed than you kill. But if you starve the town, you are sure of victory." I can attest to that, being a writer. Talking of a friend of ours, Reynolds, it says perhaps Reynolds, actually, associating with persons of very discordant principles and characters, I said he was a very universal man, quite a man of the world. Johnson said, "Yes, sir, but one may be so much a man of the world as to be nothing in the world." I remember a passage in Goldsmith's Vicars of Wakefield, which he was afterwards fool enough to expunge. Quote, "I do not love a man who is zealous for nothing." I said to this, "That was a fine passage." And Johnson said, "Yes, sir, there was another fine passage, too," which he struck out. Quote, "When I was a young man, being anxious to distinguish myself, I was perpetually starting new propositions. But I soon gave this over, for I found that generally what was new was false." I said I did not like to sit with people of whom I had not a good opinion. Oh, I'm sorry. So that false, up to false, was quoting, was Johnson quoting Goldsmith. Now, this is Boswell saying, I said I did not like to sit with people of whom I had not a good opinion. Johnson answered, but you must not indulge your delicacy too much, or you will be a tete-a-tete man all your life. During my stay in London this spring, I found I was unaccountably negligent in preserving Johnson's sayings, more so than at any time when I was happy enough to have an opportunity of hearing his wisdom and wit. So maybe less bon mots this time today. There was no help for it now. I must contest myself with presenting such scraps as I have, but I am nevertheless ashamed and vexed to think how much has been lost. It is not that there was a bad crop this year, but that I was not sufficiently careful in gathering it in. I, therefore, in some instances can only exhibit a few detached fragments. Well, we get something at least. Talking of the wonderful concealment of the author of the celebrated letters signed Junius, Johnson said, I should have believed Burke to be Junius, because I know no man but Burke who was capable of writing these letters. But Burke spontaneously denied to me. The case would have been different had I asked him if he was the author. A man so questioned as to an anonymous publication may think he is a right to deny it. He observed that his old friend, Mr. Sheridan, had been honored with extraordinary attention in his own country by having had an exception made in his favor in an Irish Act of Parliament concerning insolvent debtors. Thus to be singled out, said Johnson, by a legislator as an object of public consideration and kindness is a proof of no common merit. At Streatham on Monday, March 29th, at breakfast, he maintained that a father had no right to control the inclinations of his daughters in marriage. Well, that's something different from him. On Wednesday, March 31st, when I visited him and confessed an excess of which I had very seldom been guilty, that I had spent a whole night in playing at cards, and that I could not look back on it with satisfaction instead of a harsh animadversion, Johnson mildly said, Alas, sir, on how few things can we look back with satisfaction? On Thursday, April 1st, he commended one of the Dukes of Devonshire for a dogged veracity. He said, too, London is nothing to some people, but to a man whose pleasure is intellectual, London is the place. And there is no place where economy can be so well practiced as in London. More can be had here for the money, even by ladies, than anywhere else. You cannot play tricks with your fortune in a small place. You must make it a uniform appearance. Here a lady may have a well-furnished apartment and elegant dress without any meat in her kitchen. Modernity. It's coming. I was amused by considering with how much ease and coolness he could write or talk to a friend, exhorting him not to suppose that happiness was not to be found as well in other places as in London, when he himself was at all times sensible of its being, comparatively speaking, a heaven upon earth. The truth is that by those who from sagacity, attention, and experience have learned the full advantage of London, its preeminence over every other place, not only for variety of enjoyment, but for comfort, will be felt with a philosophical exultation. The freedom from remark and petty censure with which life may be passed there is a circumstance which a man who knows the teasing restraint of a narrow circle must relish highly. Mr. Burke, whose orderly and amiable domestic habits might make the eye of observation less irksome to him than to most men, said once very pleasantly in my hearing, Though I have the honor to represent Bristol, I should not like to live there. I should be obliged to be so much upon my good behavior. In London, a man may live in splendid society at one time and in frugal retirement at another, without animadversion. There and there alone, a man's own house is truly his castle, in which he can be in perfect safety from intrusion whenever he pleases. I never shall forget how well this was expressed to me one day by Mr. Meynell. The chief advantage of London, said he, is that a man is always so near his borough. He said of one of his old acquaintances, I think this is Johnson now, and a footnote here says James Elphinstone, this is the old acquaintance, he is very fit for a traveling governor. He knows French very well. He is a man of good principles, and there would be no danger that a young gentleman should catch his manner. For it is so very bad that it must be avoided. In that respect, he would be like the drunken helot. And a gentleman, probably William Stratham, has informed me that Johnson said of the same person, that being James Elphinstone, Sir, he has the most inverted understanding of any man whom I have ever known. Well, I got to look up this James Elphinstone now. He's quite the character. All right, well, until next time, bye from Boswell.